My next guest is Dr. Michele Schmidt Moore. Michele has worked for over 2 decades as a district and school level administrator, instructional designer, coach, and teacher. She is also the host of Design Lessons podcast. Through individual coaching sessions and workshops, Michele uses design thinking and project-based learning principles to support educators with actionable steps to become leaders and change makers in their lives and the lives of their students. Welcome to the podcast, Michele.
Oh, thanks so much, Dana. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, we connected a few weeks ago at the Teach Better conference mid-October, and you're also a podcaster, and you were doing some podcasts there as well. And I'm just thrilled to have you on to talk about what you do. So we'll go right into my first question. I ask everybody, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Well, that my story has sort of three parts. So I'll try to tell them as succinctly as possible, but it really has led me to what I'm doing now with life design, and also just creating a vision and making it come to fruition. I am, and still a lifelong educator, but I feel as though I had 1 year in my life, and I feel like everyone has a watershed time.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, everyone's watershed time right now has been the pandemic because
Mm-hmm.
it's caused all of us to look at our lives and look at systems in just a different light. But my watershed moment came a few years before the pandemic. I was the kind of educator who got to work at 6:30 in the morning and sometimes didn't leave till 9:30 at night. And just depending on what was going on. But that same year, my dad had a health crisis. I got a call in the middle of the day that said he was in the hospital, and I rushed around. If you're familiar with the DC area, there's a beltway. Rushed around the beltway, a trip that normally would take an hour and a half in traffic. I was there in 45 minutes. And I got there, and my dad was just lifeless and looking at the ceiling. And it was sort of a critical moment. And to speed the story up a little bit, it ends well for him. He's doing fine, but it was a turning point, or at least one of the turning points for me. It made me be a little bit more cognizant of family and the time that I was spending in different places in my life. The second thing that happened that year was my husband's company closed. And the happy part about that is we were like, oh, you know what? You can retire, right? He had been saving for years. And so we're like, great, you can retire. The third thing, and this is probably the thing that finally just made me turn my life around, is it literally ended up having a panic attack in the parking lot. And when I went to a therapist, because I think mental health is important, she's like, you have expectations for yourself, unrealistic expectations for yourself. And those three things combined, and all happening in the same year, made me decide that I need to design my life to really honor the things that I value, the things that give me energy and make me excited to wake up each day. And so that's what kind of brought me to the things that I do now with clients, which is helping them to design a life that they love to wake up to, really using those design thinking processes instead of for product design, which is what they're used for in the business world, and system design. We use them for personal and professional development.
So do you only work with educators and designing kind of that life design, or is it also people in different fields?
People in all fields. So yeah, I mean, of course, educators have my heart because I've always been an educator, but no, it's not limited. These steps aren't limited just to educators. I think that when you look at some of the steps of design thinking, about a lot of any field can use them for sure. Yeah, and any individual can use them. So yeah, I absolutely work with clients who are not educators, but I also work with educators as well.
So talk to me a little bit about work that you did in educational spaces with design thinking of the curriculum, and how you now design her life design master class. So how are you using that format, kind of shifting that from educational space?
So So if you're on my website, which is michelleschmidtmoore.com,
Mhm.
you can download a Project U 30-day action planner. And what that does for you is it walks you through, and I'm going to do it for you right now, is
Mhm.
walks you through the leader process, which is basically the design thinking process,
Okay.
but it's steps by step. It's L is for listen, not I, L is for listen. E is really having empathy. So L is
Mhm.
listening, what is important to me? E is really evaluating, having empathy for yourself and figuring out what's the thing that I need to focus on specifically. A is
Mhm.
accessing all of the ideas that you have, really figuring out what are your barriers to creating a solution and what is working. And D, you
Mhm.
finally designed that solution that's going to work for you. E, go out and experiment and do it, and R, reflect.
Mhm.
So going through that process can help you solve a very specific daily challenge that you have. And that's what I do. Like if I do a workshop,
Mhm.
like I recently did at the Teach Better conference, we look at one small daily challenge that you're having,
Okay.
or if you're doing the Project U project, you can do it. But if you're a part of the Life Design Masterclass, now that is like a 6-week cohort. And
Mhm.
we use that same acronym LEADER to get you there, but we do more in depth, right? We're looking at
Mhm.
what are your goals for yourself in terms of your career? What are your health and wellness goals? What is your passion project? Each of us
Mhm.
kind of has a creative outlet. What's our passion project? And a lot of times that's tied into our professional goals as well.
Mhm.
And we look at each of those areas of your life. We do a forecast for 10 years out, and then we
Mhm.
sort of backward plan some milestones and some goals. But I think the one thing I want to stress is that the leader process, I look at it as a mindset, like a vibe, right? As
Mhm.
well as a verb. Like it is, here are the action steps to get you there. And if you come with this mindset of reflection and refinement and being really sort of grounded in the process
Mhm.
of getting to where you want to go, then you're using that sort of design thinking process, because it really is about refinement and reflection, or reflection and
Mhm.
then refinement.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so that 6-week cohort is live. You know, we do it together. You're in the company of others who are also sort of getting their life in order, so to speak, and really choosing things that light them up instead
Mhm.
of doing what they've always done, instead of doing the status quo.
Okay. And how often do you offer these 6-week cohorts?
Probably about every 2 months or so. So
Okay.
I'll be offering a new one for the new year.
Mhm.
We'll start sort of talking about it in December. So you can always
Mhm.
go on the wait list at any time, but the new one will start in the new year. And
Okay.
then every couple of months, I offer it each month again.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So people that want to participate in that don't really have to know much about the design thinking process, because you kind of peel back the layers and you have those
Yeah.
different steps that people are supposed to work through. Is it kind of like you have a time in the Zoom meetings to discuss, and then you kind of have homework people need to work on? I would,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, we
Mhm.
come together, we look at the strategy that we're going to do, we try it out. And then, of course, yes, there's always a little bit of homework so that you can, because, a strategy is not going to take the little bit of time that we're
Mhm.
in. And then the next week we come back and we build upon that. So we're looking at, who do you need to be in order to walk into that vision that you have for your life? We look at different listening strategies so you can get really clear on what it is that you actually want. So you don't have to
Mhm.
come with this vision that you already have. I think the best thing, and what I found, people who are reflective or open to being reflective,
Mhm.
um, I think do the best with the Life Design Masterclass. But I
Mhm.
do definitely walk you through the steps, and I give you very specific strategies for each step.
Mhm.
And I find that people learn something about themselves. Life is a big, massive experiment, and if you're willing to kind of step a little bit outside your comfort zone, if you're willing
Mhm.
to change your expectations for yourself, and I don't mean lower them, I mean sometimes your expectations for yourself are just different from what everyone just follows that normal path in life, right?
Mhm.
You're
Mhm.
really looking at what's important to you. Where do you want to have time? In your day, your week, your year. Where do you want to build in time, and where do you want to get rid of things that aren't serving you any longer?
Mhm. Mhm. So you said you have a 6-week cohort, but you also do these workshops. So you had a
Mhm.
condensed version of that at the Teach Better conference. So, and you said the title of that is Project You Design a Life Made for You. So how is that maybe kind of a little bit of a taste of what people can at least start out with if they see you at a conference? What would
So
they be like?
in Yeah, absolutely. In that conference, I tell you that the story about my father and that whole year in a little bit
Mhm,
more in depth and a little more
mhm,
detail. But I tell you that story so that you can start thinking about what your watershed moment is.
mhm,
Um, and then we actually, in during that sort of shorter, we pick one sort of daily challenge that
mhm,
is just getting in your way each day. And that way we can move through the design thinking process. So you go
mhm,
through knowing and understanding the process, but you also walk through and you've got a solution to that daily challenge that you're ready to implement really right
mhm,
away.
mhm,
So that's the biggest thing is you gain is that mindset, but also the actual steps.
mhm,
A lot of times we'll do a joint, you always have a choice. You can choose one of your own challenges, because I want
mhm,
people to choose something that is specific and personalized to them. Or you can go with the inquiry question of how do I wake up excited for the
mhm,
day?
mhm,
So that's the one we use as our model question. But I have found participants have asked the question of, how can I be content throughout the
mhm,
day? How can I continue to work without external recognition, right? We
mhm,
sometimes are missing that external validation. Some people have asked themselves, how can I get out the door in the morning on time? Sometimes
mhm,
it's very
mhm,
specific as that. So each person kind of ends up with their own question, or
mhm,
they can do the question, the joint question, and sort of go along with that.
mhm, mhm. And then you do have a 30-day action planner. Is
Mhm.
that something that people would buy online or download from your website?
Yes, it's absolutely free. It's if you go to michelleschmidtmoore.com,
Mhm,
and Michelle's with one L, that's always a tricky.
mhm,
And it's right there, first thing you see, it says download the Project U 30-day action planner. And the great thing about that is it walks you through the leader process as well. It's a little
mhm,
bit like the workshop, except for, of course, you're getting those prompts
mhm,
in the planner and also through email, and there's some audio podcast episodes that I point you to so you can have the specific strategies. So that's completely free. You can absolutely try out the process. And I'm just an email away. So if it gets to
mhm.
any parts of the process and you get stuck, you can just email me and I'll help you out.
Great, great. So you've also been podcasting for a while. So your design lessons podcast, is this something that you coincidentally started when you launched this program, or is it something that came about later?
I think actually the podcast came first. So
Hmm.
I've always been interested when I think about authentic learning experiences, I think of them as being connected to the real world. I
Hmm.
feel that's important when we talk about our students or really anyone, right? So that
Hmm.
we hone in on our creative and our critical thinking, and then of course the idea of mindset. So those three were always my pillars for the podcast.
Hmm.
So any episodes that I created that either were me, and I always give very concrete strategies in the podcast.
Hmm.
Anytime you listen, it's always a concrete strategy. We just did one on how to bust through procrastination.
Hmm.
We did an episode on work-life balance and how it's all a lie, and here's some strategies you can use instead. So usually for the podcast, in essence, was my passion project. When you talk about life design, the podcast was my passion project that really
Hmm.
helped me to
Hmm.
expand my professional learning network. It
Hmm.
helped me to connect with so many other people and so many other educators. So for me, it's been a real creative outlet
Hmm.
because it allows me to connect with so many people and hear their story. And so that's why I started actually with the podcast, and then that's grown and blossomed into the work I'm doing now with life design pathways, because that's what we're doing. We're designing a pathway for you, building in those milestones, a little bit of an extrinsic motivation to go along with, of course, figuring out what is your purpose, what is your why, And how do you get from where you are now to where you want to be?
And so on the podcast, you say you do talk to people
Mhm.
and interview. So how often does the podcast come out? And do you do a lot of episodes just yourself?
I do a combination. So, and it also depends on the season. So, last season, on season 3 of the podcast, we walked through the leader process together. So, those were all solo episodes. This season on the podcast, we're doing a bit of a mix. So, you'll have some podcast episodes that are me, giving just like the 2 examples I gave with procrastination and work life balance, where I give you very specific strategies for how to combat those 2 sort of stressors that are often in people's lives. But I also do podcast episodes where I'm talking to people who are leaders in their own lives, people who have passion projects, and I talk to them about what their passion project is and where is their passion project now, and where do they want to see is their next step. So we do a little bit of coaching on the podcast, but also people get an opportunity to share what's really exciting for them. And so that kind of support. I love spreading the word for what people are passionate about, and so that is those are the 2 kinds of episodes. The episodes come out twice a month. So I do twice a month. I have an episode. Usually one's an interview, and the other one is usually a single episode.
Okay. So on those coaching episodes, what does that look like? Is that somebody who is currently going through the cohort? So to kind of walk
Oh
me through
no.
what that would look like.
Yeah, so it can be either or, right? So
Okay.
sometimes it is someone who's in the cohort who's agreed to come on and have a
Okay.
coaching session. But most of the time, it is just people who are out in the world doing really interesting things, who've kind of like up leveled their professional life a little bit and have maybe started a project of their own that they're interested in sharing with the world. And we talk about their project.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you are also available to give PD to districts and schools. And would this be kind of based on what you've talked about, or do you also kind of focus some of the school-based PD on design thinking and project-based learning?
Yeah, so for school-based PD, I like working sort of with organizations as they're streamlining sort of their vision for where they want to go. So we use
Okay.
design thinking to make sort of a strategic plan
Okay.
for let's say if it's a school or a district, where they want to go. And so we use a lot of the different strategies for design thinking in order to listen to stakeholders that are interested in as they're creating their vision for their school or they're creating a vision for a program. I've used this process also with students. So, for instance, during the pandemic, our students were, of course, learning online. And so we used the leader process. I asked them the question, our inquiry question was, what would be an ideal online learning experience for them? And so they were their best stakeholders themselves, and I didn't, I said in any class, right? It doesn't have to be specifically. So they did a lot of listening to each other in terms of what was important to them, what excited them, what engaged them. And in the end, so the prototypes that they came up with, some people came up with prototypes for what would a week look like. Some people came up with prototypes with what would a specific day look like. Some people came up, so the outcomes were varied, right? So each of the students, or actually I had them working in groups, came out with different presentations as a result of that. So it's definitely something I can do 2 ways, right? So we can work with educators on how do I teach my students these design thinking skills, and we can come up with problems that are specific to your discipline or specific to students themselves. Or also, if you're looking at a larger vision, like if you are a principal looking at, we want to revise our vision for our school, or we want to solve a specific issue that we're having at our school, then we can use design thinking to make sure we're listening to all of our stakeholders, that we're honing in, having empathy, really honing in into what is the actual problem. And then we're going to do some divergent thinking and access multiple solutions, and then streamline that down to a very specific solution that we're going to try out collect data on, and then revise and reflect and move forward. So there's very many applications, absolutely. Whether I'm working with an organization or one-on-one with people for their professional development,
Mhm.
or working in schools teaching students how to use design thinking to solve problems within different disciplines.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, so a wide variety of offerings and, catering towards the specific schools' needs, it sounds like. So
Absolutely.
we've had a lot of conversation about what's got you started on this process of, her life design masterclass, and also about what you can offer to anybody who's interested in joining the cohort, and also your podcast. Out of everything we talked about today, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
I think the big thing is to listen. I think a lot of times we get caught up
Yeah.
in the business of being a leader or the business of living,
Mhm.
and we forget to listen to really what is important to us. So if I were
Mhm.
to give homework per se, I would say take this week and really listen to what lights you up, right?
Mhm.
Each day, what has lit you up, and pay attention also to what's bringing you down, right?
Mhm.
What is making you feel heavy? And then look by the end of the week, what are some things that you can eliminate as a
Mhm.
result of that sort of mini experiment that you've given to yourself? And what are some things that you can, um, I'm going to say, what's it called? The word amplify. That's the word I'm looking
Mhm.
for.
Mhm.
What are the things that you can amplify as a result of that reflection? So just start with that listening piece. And I think that you're going to uncover some things maybe that you didn't even realize.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, great words to ponder and think about as we end the podcast today. Where can people connect with you and find you online?
Well, my website is michelleschmidtmoore.com. Always a good start. And then, of course, on all of the socials, my handle is M for Michelle and then Schmidt Moore.
Mhm.
It's always at M Schmidt Moore.
Great. I'll make sure I put those in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for being my guest on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It was great having you on today.
Thanks so much, Dana. It was great talking to you as well.